On the night of January 30th, 1945, a ship carrying over 10,000 souls steamed through the frozen darkness of the Baltic Sea. Mothers clutched infants against the bitter cold. Children slept on mattresses lining every corridor. Elderly refugees sat shoulder to shoulder in what used to be luxury ballrooms, dreaming of escape from the advancing Red Army. 70 minutes later, most of them would be dead. The Wilhelm Gustloff sank in water so cold that those who jumped in had minutes to live. The air temperature was -18 degrees Celsius. Ice floes dotted the surface, and as the ship listed violently to port, dragging thousands into the Black Sea, the screams echoed across the Baltic until they faded into frozen silence. 9,343 people died that night, 6 times more than the Titanic and the Lusitania combined. It remains the deadliest maritime disaster in recorded history, and yet almost no one knows it happened. Because the victims were German, because it occurred in the final chaos of World War II, because history is written by the victors, and the victors had no interest in mourning enemy dead. But this story is not about nations or ideologies. It is about children frozen in life jackets, about mothers choosing which child to save, about a captain who made decisions that sealed the fate of thousands, and about a Soviet submarine commander who saw a massive ship silhouetted against the shore and decided it was his ticket to redemption. This is the story of the Wilhelm Gustloff, a Nazi pleasure cruiser turned floating coffin, a symbol of propaganda that became a tomb for 10,000 innocents. Welcome inside the deadliest shipwreck the world has ever forgotten. Davos, Switzerland, February 4th, 1936. A 26-year-old Jewish medical student named David Frankfurter walks through the snow toward a house he has never visited. In his coat pocket, a revolver he purchased for 10 Swiss francs. In his mind, a plan that has consumed him for months. Frankfurter is not a soldier. He is not an assassin by training or temperament. He is a sickly young man from Croatia who has suffered from tuberculosis of the bone since childhood. 5 surgeries by age 23. A pit behind one ear from a mastoid operation. He came to Switzerland to study medicine after Nazi laws banned Jews from German universities. He came to escape. Instead, he found the enemy had followed him. Wilhelm Gustloff runs the Nazi Party's Swiss operation from this alpine resort town. 45 local groups, 50 bases of operations, a network of informants spying on German Jews across neutral Switzerland. He distributes copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. He organizes youth rallies in border zones. He is Hitler's man in a country that pretends the madness next door cannot touch it. Frankfurter finds the address in the phone book. It is that simple. The leader of Swiss Nazism is listed like a dentist or a plumber. He checks into the Hotel Metropole Leuven and waits. February 4th falls on a Tuesday, considered a day of good luck in Jewish tradition. He needs all the luck he can find. That evening, Frankfurter knocks on Gustloff's door. The Nazi's wife, Hedwig, answers. She shows him to the study and asks him to wait. Her husband is on the telephone in the next room. When Wilhelm Gustloff enters, Frankfurter is sitting across from a portrait of Adolf Hitler. He stands. He draws the revolver. He fires 5 times. Head, neck, chest. Gustloff collapses. The portrait watches from the wall. Frankfurter walks outside. He tries to turn the gun on himself. He cannot pull the trigger. Instead, he finds a neighbor's house, asks to use the telephone, and calls the police. I fired the shots because I am a Jew. The Nazi propaganda machine roars to life. Hitler attends Gustloff's memorial service in person, sitting beside the widow Hedwig. He declares Gustloff a Blutzeug, a blood martyr of the Nazi cause. He wants revenge, but the 1936 Berlin Olympics are months away. International boycotts loom. Retaliation must wait. It will come. 2 years later, the assassination of another Nazi official gives Hitler his pretext. Kristallnacht, synagogues burning across Germany, Jewish businesses destroyed. Frankfurter's act of defiance becomes a footnote in the machinery of genocide. Frankfurter receives 18 years in Swiss prison. He serves 9. His father is not so fortunate. The Nazis find the old rabbi in Croatia. They beat him. They pull his beard. They murder him at Jasenovac concentration camp. Meanwhile, Hitler orders a memorial more permanent than speeches or martyrdom ceremonies. Germany will build the largest, most advanced cruise ship in the Nazi fleet. It will carry workers on subsidized vacations. It will showcase the glory of the Reich. And it will bear the name Wilhelm Gustloff. November 1933. The Nazi regime announces a new program called Kraft durch Freude, strength through joy. The idea is seductive. German workers, beaten down by the Depression, will receive subsidized access to leisure activities once reserved for the wealthy. Concerts, theatre, sporting events, holidays in the Alps, cruises to the Norwegian fjords. The man in charge is Robert Ley, head of the German Labour Front. By 1939, his organization will become the largest tourism operator in the world. 30 million members, millions of participants in organized activities each year. Workers finally tasting the good life. But nothing in Nazi Germany comes without strings. Gestapo agents pose as fellow travelers on every cruise. Reports are filed on passengers who complain or question. The program builds loyalty to the regime while monitoring the population for dissent. It is control disguised as generosity, surveillance wrapped in vacation packages, and at its heart, a fleet of cruise ships. Hitler wants something unprecedented. A ship without social classes. No first class, second class, third class divisions that mark every other ocean liner afloat. Every cabin the same size. Every passenger equal. Crew quarters identical to guest quarters. A floating demonstration of the Volksgemeinschaft, the people's community that Nazi ideology promises to build. There is one exception, a single larger cabin reserved for Hitler himself. The classless ship still needs its Führer. Construction begins at Blohm & Voss shipyard in Hamburg on August 1st, 1936. Yard number 511. 20 months of work, 25 million Reichsmarks. The result is a vessel unlike anything Germany has built before. 208 meters long, 23 meters wide, 25,000 gross register tons, 4 8-cylinder Mayen diesel engines producing 9,500 horsepower, top speed of 15.5 knots, range of 12,000 nautical miles, a swimming pool, a cinema, a theatre, a concert hall, a gymnasium, 489 cabins for 1,465 passengers and 417 crew. The interior design falls to Professor Woldemar Brinkmann of Munich. He creates spaces that are solid, conservative, deliberately modest. No gilded excess, no aristocratic pretension. Romantic paintings of rural landscapes, simple furniture. The aesthetic of the German middle class elevated to oceanic scale. On May 5th, 1937, the ship is ready for launch. Adolf Hitler arrives at the shipyard. accompanied by Heinrich Himmler, Joseph Goebbels, Rudolf Hess, and Robert Lai. Thousands gather along the Hamburg waterfront. Sirens sound across the harbor. Flags snap in the wind. The ship was supposed to be named Adolf Hitler, but Hitler changed his mind after sitting beside Hedwig Gustloff at her husband's memorial service. A murdered Nazi deserves immortality. Hedwig steps forward, smashes a champagne bottle against the bow, and christens the vessel with her dead husband's name. The Wilhelm Gustloff slides into the water. Her maiden voyage comes in March 1938. Two-thirds of the passengers are Austrian, carefully selected to build goodwill before the Anschluss referendum. The following month, the ship anchors off Tilbury, England, serving as a floating polling station. Nearly 2,000 German and Austrian expatriates cast votes on Austrian annexation while technically in international waters. 1,968 vote yes, 10 vote no. The cruises continue through 1938 and into 1939. Madeira, Norway, the Italian Riviera. A 7-day cruise to Norway costs 50 Reichsmarks, roughly 1 week's wages. Workers who could never afford such travel now pose for photographs on sundecks, surrounded by ocean, surrounded by propaganda. In March 1939, Hitler visits the ship one final time. He inspects the cabins, the public rooms, the decks where loyal Germans take their subsidized vacations. It is his last time aboard. 2 months later, the Wilhelm Gustloff joins a fleet of KDF ships sailing to Spain. Their mission is to bring home the Condor Legion, the German pilots and soldiers who helped Francisco Franco crush the Spanish Republic. The veterans return to massive parades in Hamburg, heroes of fascism, carried home on a ship named for a Nazi martyr. Then September arrives. Germany invades Poland. The pleasure cruises end forever, and the ship that symbolized strength through joy begins its transformation into something else entirely. September 22nd, 1939. 3 weeks after Germany invades Poland, the Kriegsmarine requisitions the Wilhelm Gustloff. The cruise ship that carried workers to Norwegian fjords will now carry wounded soldiers home from war. She is painted white. Red crosses mark her hull and funnels. Under international law, she becomes a protected vessel, exempt from attack as long as she serves only medical purposes. For the next year, the Wilhelm Gustloff operates as a hospital ship, ferrying casualties from the German campaign in Norway back to the Reich. It is necessary work. It is also temporary. By November 1940, the ship's hospital duties end. The Kriegsmarine has other plans. The Wilhelm Gustloff sails to the occupied Polish port of Gdynia, which German authorities have renamed Gotenhafen. She drops anchor. Her engines go silent. They will not run again for over 4 years. The ship becomes a floating barracks for the 2nd Submarine Training Division. Approximately 1,000 U-boat trainees live aboard at any given time, learning their craft in the classrooms and corridors of what was once a luxury cruise liner. The swimming pool that hosted vacationing workers now sits drained and empty. The concert hall that rang with music falls quiet. The promenade decks, where passengers strolled beneath northern lights, become passageways for young men learning to kill beneath the sea. No one maintains the ship for ocean travel. The hull is not inspected. The engines are not exercised. The lifeboats are borrowed for other uses around the harbor, scattered among vessels that actually sail. The Wilhelm Gustloff becomes a stationary object, useful only for the space she provides. In October 1943, American bombers raid Gotenhaven harbor. The Gustloff takes minor damage. No one bothers with significant repairs. She is not going anywhere. A year earlier, something darkly ironic occurs nearby. Nazi filmmakers are producing a propaganda movie about the Titanic. They want to portray the disaster as a failure of British and American capitalism, a story of wealthy passengers dooming a ship through greed and arrogance. The SS Cap Arcona, another large liner, serves as the stand-in for the doomed vessel. Members of the 2nd Submarine Training Division aboard the Wilhelm Gustloff work as extras, a Nazi propaganda film about the world's most famous shipwreck, filmed within sight of a ship that will suffer a far worse fate. The extras do not know they are rehearsing for their own disaster. By late 1944, the situation in East Prussia grows desperate. The Red Army is advancing from the east, grinding through German defenses with overwhelming force. Soviet soldiers carry memories of what the Wehrmacht did to their homeland. Burned villages, mass executions, the siege of Leningrad, where nearly 1 million civilians starved. They are not coming to liberate. They are coming for revenge. Word spreads among German civilians. Stories of the Nemmersdorf massacre in October 1944. Soviet troops overrunning a village, murdering civilians, assaulting women. Nazi propaganda amplifies the atrocities, hoping fear will stiffen resistance. Instead, it triggers panic. Millions of Germans live in East Prussia. They want to flee west, away from the approaching horror. But Gauleiter Erich Koch, the Nazi party leader for the region, forbids evacuation. He declares that fleeing is defeatism, undermining military morale. Citizens who attempt to leave face punishment. So they stay. They wait. They watch the eastern horizon and pray the front will hold. It does not hold. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz commands the Kriegsmarine. He sees what is coming. By January 1945, Soviet forces will cut the land routes. Over 2 million German civilians will be trapped between the Red Army and the Baltic Sea. Their only escape will be by water. Dönitz begins assembling every vessel he can find. Former passenger liners, freighters, fishing boats, ferries, anything that floats. He needs to move a population the size of a major city across a frozen sea patrolled by enemy submarines. His eyes turn to Gotenhaven harbor, where a massive ship has been sitting idle for more than 4 years. Her engines have not run since 1940. Her lifeboats are scattered across the port. Her crew has dispersed. None of that matters now. The Wilhelm Gustloff is about to sail again. January 12, 1945. The Red Army launches its East Prussian offensive. 2 massive Soviet fronts smash into German defenses simultaneously. The 3rd Belarusian Front, under General Ivan Chernyakhovsky, attacks from the east. The 2nd Belarusian Front, under Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky, strikes from the south. The Wehrmacht crumbles. Within 11 days, Soviet forces reach the Baltic coast near Elbing. The land corridor connecting East Prussia to Western Germany is severed. Over 2 million German civilians are now trapped in a shrinking pocket between the advancing Red Army and the frozen sea. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz does not wait for permission. On January 21st, he begins issuing orders. 2 days later, he radios a coded message to Naval Command at Gotenhaven. One word: Hannibal. Operation Hannibal is the largest naval evacuation in history, larger than Dunkirk. Over 15 weeks, somewhere between 600 and 1,000 vessels of every description will carry refugees across the Baltic. Former passenger liners, freighters, fishing trawlers, ferries, landing craft, anything with a hull and an engine. The destination is any port west of the Soviet advance. Kiel, Flensburg, Swinemünde, Copenhagen. Rear Admiral Konrad Engelhardt coordinates the logistics. He has been quietly planning this since late 1944, assembling a fleet of 22 passenger liners over 10,000 tons each. Now the plans become reality. Ships that haven't sailed in years must be made seaworthy in days. The refugees are already moving. Columns of horse-drawn wagons clog the roads leading to the Baltic ports. Women drive the carts. Children huddle beneath blankets. The men are mostly gone, conscripted into the final desperate defense of the Reich. Temperatures drop to -20 degrees Celsius. Those without shelter freeze where they fall. By mid-January, the port of Pillau holds 100,000 refugees. Gotenhafen is overwhelmed. Danzig is bursting. People sleep in the streets, in doorways, anywhere they can find a surface not covered by ice. They wait for ships that may never come. They watch the eastern sky for Soviet aircraft that strafe refugee columns without warning. Some try to cross the frozen Vistula lagoon on foot. The ice holds for some. For others, it cracks. Wagons plunge through. Families disappear into black water. No one stops to help. There is no time. Nazi party officials demand priority boarding for their families. Donitz refuses. The evacuation will not become a rescue mission for the privileged. Ordinary Germans will board alongside everyone else, or Donitz will answer to history. In Gotenhafen harbor, mechanics swarm over the Wilhelm Gustloff. Her engines have been dormant since 1940. They must work now. Technicians locate scattered lifeboats across the port and reinstall as many as they can find. There are not enough. The ship's original complement provided capacity for approximately 5,000 people. It will have to do. Anti-aircraft guns are mounted on deck. This is not a symbolic gesture. It is a legal calculation. Under the laws of war, armed vessels are legitimate military targets. The guns that might protect the ship from Soviet aircraft also strip away any claim to protected status. If a submarine finds her, she is fair game. 4 captains are assigned to the vessel. Friedrich Petersen, a civilian with decades of experience, takes overall command. Lieutenant Commander Wilhelm Zahn, a U-boat veteran, serves as military commander. 2 additional captains round out the bridge crew. 4 men to share responsibility for what is about to unfold. 4 men who will disagree about nearly everything. Boarding begins on January the 25th. German officials issue tickets at first, attempting to maintain order. It does not last. Word spreads that the Gustloff is sailing. Refugees surge toward the gangways. Families are separated in the crush. Children are passed over heads to reach the deck. Pregnant women are shoved aside. The elderly fall and are trampled. Every space fills. Cabins designed for 2 hold 8. Corridors become sleeping quarters. The drained swimming pool is lined with mattresses. The concert hall becomes a dormitory. Still they keep coming. The ship was built for 1,465 passengers. By January 30th, over 10,000 souls are aboard. And in the frozen waters of the Baltic, a Soviet submarine is hunting. Alexander Ivanovich Marinesco is born on January 15, 1913, in Odessa. His father is a Romanian sailor named Ion Marinescu, who fled to Russia after beating an officer. His mother is Ukrainian. The family Russifies their name, changing the final letter from U to O. Young Alexander grows up in a port city, surrounded by ships and sailors and the smell of the Black Sea. He joins the Soviet merchant marine as a teenager. By the mid-1930s, he transfers to the Baltic Fleet, training as a submarine officer. He is good at his job. Very good. In 1939, at age 26, he is appointed commander of the submarine M96. Within a year, his boat is declared the best in the Baltic Fleet. He receives a golden watch. He is promoted to captain lieutenant. War comes in June 1941. Germany invades the Soviet Union. The Baltic Fleet finds itself bottled up, trapped by German forces that have surrounded Leningrad. Marinesko's submarine cannot reach open water. He waits, he drinks, he waits some more. In October 1942, he gets a chance to prove himself. M96 lands a commando unit on the Estonian coast. Their mission is to raid a German headquarters and capture an Enigma coding machine. The commandos fail. Half of them die. But Marinesko has performed his part flawlessly. He receives the Order of Lenin and promotion to captain third rank. He is readmitted as a candidate member of the Communist Party. In early 1943, he takes command of the S-13. She is a Stalinets-class submarine, a design jointly developed by Soviet and German engineers in 1933 before the two nations became mortal enemies. 78 meters long, 1,050 tons displacement underwater. Capable of carrying 12 torpedoes, she is one of 13 Stalinets submarines built. By war's end, she will be the only one still afloat. Marinesko should be a rising star. He is not. The problem is discipline, or rather, the complete absence of it. Marinesko drinks heavily. He disappears on shore leave and returns days later unable to account for his whereabouts. He fraternizes with foreign women in occupied Finnish ports, a violation that could be construed as espionage, his superior's file reports. The NKVD opens a file. The noose tightens slowly around his neck. New Year's Eve, 1944. The S-13 is stationed at the Finnish port of Hanko, preparing for a combat patrol. Marinesko goes ashore to celebrate. He does not return. 1 day passes, then 2, then 3. The submarine sits in port, ready to sail, missing its captain. The NKVD suspects desertion, treason, perhaps recruitment by British or American intelligence. A court-martial seems inevitable. In wartime Soviet Union, the penalty for such charges is death. Marinesko finally reappears on January 3rd. He claims he spent the missing days with a Swedish woman who owns a restaurant. He cannot remember specifics. He was drunk. He is always drunk. Admiral Vladimir Tributs, commander of the Baltic Fleet, faces a decision. He can arrest Marinesko and let the NKVD have him, or he can send him back to sea, where a successful patrol might redeem his record. Tributs needs every submarine operational. Joseph Stalin is demanding action in the Baltic. The Germans are evacuating troops and civilians by sea, and Soviet submarines are expected to stop them. Tributs makes his choice. Marinesko will sail. The S-13 becomes a penalty boat. Her captain will prove his worth or die trying. On January 11th, 1945, the S-13 departs Hanko and enters the Baltic Sea. Marinesko takes position near Kolberg, then moves toward the Gulf of Danzig. German torpedo boats attack repeatedly. The submarine evades, survives, continues hunting. Days pass. Nothing. The Baltic is vast and cold and empty. Marinesko needs a kill. He needs something spectacular enough to erase the drinking, the women, the unauthorized absences, the NKVD file. He needs to become a hero. His crew understands. They prepare their torpedoes with particular care. On 3 of the weapons, they inscribe messages in chalk. One reads, "For the motherland." Another says, "For the Soviet people." The third bears the words, "For Leningrad." Leningrad, the city where nearly 1 million Soviet civilians died during the German siege. 900 days of starvation, artillery bombardment, frozen corpses stacked in the streets. Every man aboard S-13 knows someone who suffered there. Every torpedo carries that memory into the water. By January 30th, Marinesco has been at sea for 19 days with nothing to show for it. That morning, he summons his officers. They study the charts. German evacuation routes run through the Gulf of Danzig, past the Hela Peninsula. That is where the targets will be. That is where S-13 must go. The submarine repositions. Evening falls. The Baltic turns black and cold. Snow flurries swirl across the surface. Ice floes drift in the current. Then the sonar operator hears something. Engines. Big ones. Close. Marinesco orders the submarine to surface. He climbs to the conning tower and raises his binoculars. There, silhouetted against the distant shoreline, navigation lights glowing red and green like a Christmas tree, is the largest ship he has ever seen. January 30th, 1945. Noon. The Wilhelm Gustloff prepares to cast off from Gotenhafen, exactly 12 years to the day since Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. No one aboard considers the anniversary. They are too busy trying to survive. The ship is a floating city of desperation. 10,582 souls packed into a vessel designed for fewer than 1,500. Every cabin overflows. Every corridor is clogged with bodies. The drained swimming pool holds hundreds of young women, naval auxiliaries in their blue uniforms, lying on mattresses arranged in neat rows across the tile floor. The glass dome above them is covered with frost. On the bridge, 4 captains argue. Friedrich Petersen is 63 years old. He has commanded merchant vessels for decades. He knows this ship. He sailed her on pleasure cruises before the war, when passengers sipped champagne and watched the Norwegian fjords glide past. Now he watches refugees vomit from seasickness before the ship has even left the dock. Lieutenant Commander Wilhelm Zahn is a U-boat veteran. He understands submarines. He understands how they hunt. He wants to sail close to shore, in shallow water where enemy submarines cannot maneuver. He wants to run without lights, invisible against the dark coastline. He wants speed. Petersen disagrees. The ship's engines have sat idle for over 4 years. The engineering crew reports problems with the high-pressure turbines. Maximum speed is impossible. 12 knots is the best they can manage, perhaps less. There is another complication. A radio message arrives warning of a German minesweeper convoy approaching from the opposite direction. The ships will pass in the night. Without navigation lights, collision is possible. Petersen orders the lights switched on. Zahn protests. Navigation lights will make the Gustloff visible for miles. Any submarine in the area will see them. Petersen overrules him. The risk of collision is immediate. The risk of submarine attack is theoretical. This decision will kill 9,000 people. At 12:30 in the afternoon, the Wilhelm Gustloff pulls away from Oxhurft Pier. A single escort accompanies her, the torpedo boat, lower. One small warship to protect 10,000 lives. It is not enough. Everyone knows it is not enough. The ship moves slowly through the harbour, past the anti-submarine nets, into the open Baltic. The temperature is 18 degrees below 0 Celsius. Ice forms on the deck railings, on the lifeboat davits, on every exposed surface. Refugees who ventured topside for fresh air retreat below, coughing, shivering, pressing together for warmth. Below decks, the conditions are almost unbearable. The ventilation system cannot handle the crush of humanity. The air grows thick and stale. Children cry. Mothers try to comfort them with food they do not have. The toilets overflow. The smell of human waste mingles with diesel fumes and fear. Heinz Schön is 19 years old. He serves as assistant purser, responsible for passenger welfare. There is no welfare to provide. He moves through the ship, stepping over families huddled in corridors, noting the locations of lifeboats he knows are insufficient, counting heads he knows cannot all be saved. He carries a clipboard. He writes down numbers. The numbers are horrifying. Late afternoon, a second escort vessel, the torpedo boat TF-1, joins the convoy. For a brief moment, the situation seems slightly less hopeless. Then TF-1 develops a leak. Her captain radios that he must return to port for repairs. The Gustloff is alone again, with only the low for protection. Evening falls. The ship rounds the Gila Peninsula and turns northwest toward the open sea. The water depth increases. 50 meters, 60. Plenty of room for a submarine to operate. Captain Zahn requests one more time that the navigation lights be extinguished. Peterson refuses. The minesweeper convoy has not yet passed. The lights stay on. The Gustloff sails on through the darkness, her red and green running lights glowing against the black water, her portholes blazing with interior light because the blackout curtains are insufficient, and there are simply too many people to enforce proper discipline. She is a beacon, a target, a floating announcement of her own position. In the water somewhere nearby, a submarine captain watches through his binoculars. He sees those lights. He calculates speed and heading. He summons his officers to confirm what he is seeing. Aboard the Gustloff, refugees settle in for the night. Some find space to lie down. Others lean against walls, against strangers, against anything solid. Children fall asleep in their mothers' arms. Pregnant women feel their babies kick. Old men close their eyes and dream of homes they will never see again. It is 9 p.m. The ship has been at sea for 8.5 hours. In 16 minutes, the first torpedo will strike. 9:16 p.m. The first torpedo strikes the bow. The explosion tears through the forward crew quarters, killing sailors in their bunks before they can wake. The ship shudders. A deep metallic groan echoes through the hull. Passengers freeze mid-conversation, mid-breath, mid-heartbeat. For a moment, no one understands what has happened. Then the second torpedo hits. It detonates directly beneath the drained swimming pool on E-deck. The blast rips upward through the tile floor, through the mattresses, through the bodies of 373 young women. The naval auxiliaries who were sleeping in neat rows are killed instantly. The glass dome above them shatters. Seawater and frozen air pour in together. The third torpedo finds the engine room. The ship's power dies. The lights go out. 10,000 people are plunged into absolute darkness. Panic. The screaming begins in the lower decks and spreads upward like fire. Refugees who are sleeping in corridors wake to find black water rushing past their feet. They scramble upright, grabbing children, grabbing strangers, grabbing anything. The emergency lighting flickers on, dim and red, casting hellish shadows on the chaos. The ship begins to list to port, slowly at first, then faster. Captain Peterson orders the watertight doors sealed. It is already too late. The torpedo damage is too extensive. Water floods compartment after compartment. The bow sinks lower. The stern rises. The angle increases. On the upper decks, crew members attempt to lower the lifeboats. The davits are frozen solid. Ice has welded the ropes to the pulleys. Men hack at the ice with axes, with knives, with bare hands that stick to the frozen metal and tear when pulled away. Some boats break free and drop into the water upside down. Others swing wildly as the ship tilts, crushing passengers against the railings. One lifeboat launches successfully, fully loaded with refugees. It descends toward the black water. Halfway down, the ropes jam. The boat hangs suspended against the hull. Those inside can do nothing but wait as the ship rolls further, pressing the lifeboat against the steel plates, splintering the wood, dumping its occupants into the sea. The water temperature is 4 degrees Celsius. A human being can survive in such water for 15 to 45 minutes. Most will lose consciousness in under 15. Children faster. The elderly faster still. Below decks, the corridors become death traps. Refugees who fled upward clog the staircases. Those behind push. Those in front cannot move. Bodies pile up at every bottleneck. People are crushed, standing upright, lungs compressed, unable to draw breath while fully above water. Mothers face impossible choices. A woman can carry one child up a staircase. Some have 2, some have 3. They must decide. They must choose which child to save. Some refuse to choose. They stay below with all of their children and die together. The ship's list reaches 30 degrees. Walking becomes climbing. Those who lose their footing slide across the deck and slam into the port railing. The railing holds. Then it doesn't. Bodies tumble into the water in clusters. Heinz Schön fights his way to the boat deck. He is 19 years old. He has a clipboard somewhere, forgotten, irrelevant. He sees an officer shoot himself in the head rather than face the water. He sees a woman hand her infant to a stranger on a lifeboat, then turn away because there is no more room. He sees children in life jackets leap into the sea and float motionless, their small bodies overcome by cold before they can drown. 40 minutes after the first torpedo, the Wilhelm Gustloff rolls completely onto her port side. Those still clinging to the starboard rail are now climbing a steel cliff. The 4 funnels, angled parallel to the water, vomit black smoke. The propellers rise into the air, still and massive and useless. The suction begins. As the ship slides under, she pulls the water down with her, and everything in that water follows. Swimmers are dragged beneath the surface. Lifeboats are capsized. Debris that might have served as flotation devices disappears into the vortex. At 10:18 p.m., 62 minutes after the first torpedo struck, the Wilhelm Gustloff vanishes beneath the Baltic Sea. She settles on the bottom 44 meters down, her hull broken, her compartments flooded, her dead still strapped into life jackets that could not save them. Above, the surface is chaos. Thousands of people thrash in the black water, screaming for help that is not coming. Ice floes drift among them. The air temperature is 18 degrees below zero. Wet clothing freezes to skin within minutes. Those who find wreckage to cling to discover their fingers will not grip. The escort vessel Lower immediately begins rescue operations. Her crew throws ropes, lowers nets, pulls survivors from the water by hand. They work frantically. They work hopelessly. There are too many people and too few minutes. The screaming fades, one voice at a time. The splashing stops. The water grows quiet. Those who survived the sinking now face a second test. They must stay alive long enough for rescue. Some have found lifeboats, others cling to wreckage. Most are simply floating, held up by life jackets, waiting for ships that may never arrive. The nearest major vessel is 2 hours away. The torpedo boat Loa is the first to respond. Her captain orders all engines stopped and begins pulling survivors from the water within minutes of the sinking. Sailors lean over the railings with ropes and boat hooks, grabbing at anything that moves. The darkness makes identification impossible. They haul aboard the living and the dead without distinction. The living are not living for long. Survivors pulled from 4-degree water collapse on deck, their bodies shutting down, their core temperatures plummeting. The ship's crew strips frozen clothing from blue flesh and wraps refugees in whatever blankets they can find. It is not enough. People rescued from the sea die on the deck of the ship that saved them. Loa's captain radios for assistance. The message goes out across the Baltic. Mass casualty event. Thousands in the water. All available vessels respond immediately. The heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper receives the distress call. She is nearby, carrying 1,500 refugees of her own, steaming toward the same western ports. Her captain faces a decision. Stopping to rescue survivors will make the Hipper a stationary target. The same submarine that sank the Gustloff is presumably still in the area, reloading torpedoes, hunting for the next kill. The Hipper does not stop. She increases speed and continues west, leaving the survivors behind. Her captain will later justify the decision by citing his responsibility to the refugees already aboard. 1,500 lives weighed against an unknown number in the water. Mathematics of catastrophe. But others come. Torpedo boat T-36 arrives under the command of Captain Robert Herring. He has been escorting another refugee ship, the Deutschland. When the distress call comes through, he immediately changes course. The Deutschland continues alone. Herring will not leave people to freeze. T-36 reaches the disaster site and finds a nightmare. The surface of the Baltic is covered with bodies. Some are moving, most are not. Ice has formed on the life jackets of the dead, glittering in the searchlights like grotesque decoration. Corpses bump against the hull as the torpedo boat maneuvers through the debris field. Herring's crew works for hours. They pull 564 survivors from the water. Everyone is a victory. Everyone costs time that others do not have. The minesweeper M387 arrives and rescues 43 more. The torpedo recovery vessel TF-19 saves another 7. Small craft from Gotenhafen venture out into the freezing darkness and return with handfuls of survivors clinging to gunwales. By midnight, the rescue operation is essentially over. Those who have not been pulled from the water by now are dead. The cold has done what the torpedoes started. The final count takes days to compile. 1,252 people are rescued from the water and the lifeboats. Of those, 13 die from their injuries within hours of rescue. 1,239 survive. 9,343 do not. Among the dead are over 5,000 children, infants who were handed into lifeboats and froze before the boats could be reached. Toddlers who slipped from their mother's arms in the panic below decks. Older children who made it to the water and discovered that their small bodies could not retain heat. The Baltic collected them all. Heinz Schoen survives. The 19-year-old assistant purser finds space on a lifeboat and endures the hours of cold and darkness until T-36 arrives. He is pulled aboard, half frozen, barely conscious, one of the lucky 1,200. He will spend the next 60 years trying to understand what happened to the other 9,000. In the chaos of the evacuation's final months, the sinking barely registers as news. The Nazi propaganda ministry suppresses detailed reporting. Morale is fragile enough without publicizing the death of 9,000 refugees. The war continues. More ships sail. More ships sink. 10 days later, the same submarine finds another target. On February 9th, 1945, Captain Marinesco and the S-13 intercept the General von Steuben, another refugee ship fleeing west with over 4,000 passengers. 2 torpedoes send her to the bottom in 7 minutes. Approximately 4,500 people die. Marinesco has now killed more people in 3 weeks than any other submarine commander in history. He returns to port expecting glory. He receives a court-martial. The Soviet Navy cannot overlook his record of insubordination, his drinking, his unauthorized absences, his fraternization with foreign women. The sinkings are acknowledged but not celebrated. His commanders recommend him for the title Hero of the Soviet Union. The recommendation is denied. Marinesco is too unreliable, too undisciplined, too embarrassing to be made a hero. He is demoted to lieutenant and transferred to a minesweeper. In October 1945, he is discharged from the Navy entirely. He drifts into civilian work, becomes a supply manager at a factory in Leningrad, drinks more heavily than ever. In 1949, he is convicted of embezzlement and sentenced to 3 years in a labor camp. The man who sank the Wilhelm Gustloff spends his final years in obscurity and poverty. He dies in Leningrad on November 25, 1963, at the age of 50. His liver has failed. Almost no one notices. The dead of the Gustloff receive even less attention. They lie 44 meters beneath the Baltic, undisturbed, uncounted, officially unacknowledged. The ship that was supposed to symbolize the triumph of National Socialism has become a mass grave that no one visits and no one mourns. For 45 years, the world forgets the worst maritime disaster in human history. Then the Soviet Union collapses, and the archives open. The world does not want to remember the Wilhelm Gustloff. For decades, almost no one tries. In the Soviet Union, the sinking is classified. The details of Marinesco's patrol are locked in naval archives, accessible only to military historians with proper clearance. The official Soviet position is silence. The refugees aboard the Gustloff were Germans. They were fleeing the Red Army. They were, in the calculus of total war, the enemy. Their deaths require no mourning, no memorials, no public acknowledgement. In the West, the silence has different origins. The Nuremberg trials are underway. The full horror of the Holocaust is emerging. 6 million Jews murdered in camps and ghettos and killing fields. The world is learning words like Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. In this context, German suffering seems obscene to mention. Who could speak of drowned refugees when the crematoria were still warm? Germany itself cannot process the loss. The nation is divided, occupied, shattered. Millions of ethnic Germans are being expelled from Eastern Europe. In a vast population transfer that will kill hundreds of thousands more. The Gustloff is one tragedy among countless tragedies, one mass grave among thousands. The survivors scatter across both Germanies, trying to rebuild lives in a country that no longer exists as they knew it. Heinz Schön cannot forget. The 19-year-old assistant purser who survived the sinking carries the memory like shrapnel lodged too deep to remove. He saw the swimming pool full of dead women. He saw mothers choose between children. He saw thousands of people die in 70 minutes. He decides someone must record what happened. He begins collecting names, survivor by survivor, document by document. He reconstructs the passenger manifest that was never officially compiled. The German maritime authorities kept no accurate count of who boarded at Gotenhafen. The chaos was too complete. Schoen makes it his life's work to impose order on that chaos. He interviews every survivor he can locate. He travels across Germany, knocking on doors, sitting in living rooms, listening to stories that have never been told. The survivors speak hesitantly at first. They have learned that their suffering does not fit the post-war narrative. They have learned to stay quiet. Schoen gives them permission to remember. The numbers emerge slowly. 8,956 refugees, 918 naval personnel from the U-boat training division, 373 female naval auxiliaries, 173 crew members, 162 wounded soldiers, 10,582 total. The count is Schoen's count, the product of decades of painstaking research. It remains the most authoritative figure available. In 1955, he publishes his first account of the sinking. Few people read it. Germany is focused on its economic miracle, on reconstruction, on forgetting. The Gustloff does not fit the story West Germany wants to tell about itself. The East German government shows even less interest. The Soviet Union is an ally. Marinesko is a Soviet hero to some, even if officially disgraced. Publicizing the sinking would complicate the narrative of socialist brotherhood. The Gustloff remains buried, literally and figuratively. Schoen keeps working. He publishes updated editions of his research in 1965, 1985, 1998. Each version contains new names, new testimonies, new details extracted from aging memories before they disappear forever. He becomes the unofficial historian of a disaster that officially does not exist. The Cold War ends. The Berlin Wall falls in 1989. The Soviet Union dissolves in 1991. Suddenly, archives that were sealed for half a century begin to open. In Moscow, naval historians gain access to the S-13's patrol logs. The details of Marinesko's attack become public knowledge for the first time. The torpedo inscriptions, the stalking approach, the 3 successful hits out of 4 torpedoes fired. The 4th torpedo, the one meant for Leningrad, jammed in its tube and never launched. Marinesko himself is rehabilitated. In 1990, 27 years after his death, the Soviet government posthumously awards him the title Hero of the Soviet Union. The honor he was denied in life is granted to his memory. His grave in St. Petersburg becomes a site of pilgrimage for naval veterans. The recognition is controversial. To Russians, Marinesko is a war hero who struck a devastating blow against the fascist enemy. To Germans, he is the man who killed 9,000 civilians. Both things are true. Neither cancels the other. In Germany, the thaw brings its own reckoning. A new generation begins asking questions their parents refuse to answer. What happened to the refugees? What happened to the expellees? What happened to the Germans who were not Nazis, but who died anyway? Günter Grass publishes his novella Crab Walk in 2002. It tells the story of the Gustloff through multiple generations of a survivor's family. The book becomes an international bestseller. For the first time, millions of people learn that the deadliest maritime disaster in history is not the Titanic. Discovery Channel produces a documentary. Diving expeditions visit the wreck, now in Polish territorial waters. The images are haunting. A ship lying on her side in murky green water, her hull intact, her portholes dark, her interior inaccessible. Polish authorities declare the site a war grave and prohibit further diving. The dead are to be left in peace. Schön lives to see his work acknowledged. The forgotten catastrophe is no longer entirely forgotten. Schools teach the sinking, museums display artifacts, survivors gather for annual commemorations, their numbers shrinking each year. He dies on April 13th, 2013, at the age of 87. He has spent 68 years documenting the disaster he witnessed as a teenager. His research fills archives. His interviews preserve voices that would otherwise be lost. He has given 9,000 ghosts the closest thing they will ever have to a memorial. His family honors his final request. They travel to the Baltic Sea, to the coordinates where the Gustloff lies. 55 degrees, 4 minutes, 22 seconds north. 17 degrees, 25 minutes, 17 seconds east. There, above 44 meters of cold water and 80 years of silence, they scatter his ashes. The assistant purser returns to his ship. The dead are still waiting to be understood. 44 meters beneath the Baltic Sea, the Wilhelm Gustloff rests on her side. The water is cold. The visibility is poor. And somewhere in that rusting hull, the remains of over 9,000 people have been waiting for 80 years. You cannot dive there legally. Polish authorities classified the wreck as a war grave. The dead are protected by international law, their final resting place off-limits to treasure hunters searching for the amber room that may or may not have been aboard. The ship sits in darkness, slowly collapsing, a tomb for children who never reached adulthood and mothers who never reached safety. If you could descend to that wreck, you would see the collapsed promenade deck where refugees pressed against glass walls as the ship went under. You would see the swimming pool area where 373 young women of the Naval Auxiliary drowned in the first minutes. You would see corridors where thousands trampled each other in darkness, trying to reach staircases that led nowhere. This is the deadliest shipwreck in recorded history. 6 times more victims than the Titanic, more dead than the Titanic and Lusitania combined, and almost no one knows it happened. That silence is not an accident. History is not simply a record of what occurred, it is a selection, a curation, a choice about which stories matter and which ones disappear. The Wilhelm Gustloff disappeared because its victims were German, because it sank during a war Germany started, because mourning Nazis, or even people fleeing alongside Nazis, was unthinkable when the world was still counting bodies at Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. But here is what the silence obscures. Most of the people aboard the Wilhelm Gustloff were not Nazis. They were refugees, women whose husbands had been conscripted, children too young to hold any ideology, elderly grandparents who remembered a Germany before Hitler. They were fleeing the Red Army because they had heard what happened to civilians who stayed behind. They were running for their lives, and they died running. Does that make them innocent? History rarely offers clean categories. The ship carried U-boat trainees who would have gone on to sink Allied vessels. It carried Nazi officials who had implemented murderous policies. It carried mothers who may have cheered at Nuremberg rallies and children who had been enrolled in Hitler Youth. Guilt and innocence swirled together in that freezing water, and the Baltic made no distinctions. But guilt does not erase humanity. The screams of a drowning child sound the same, regardless of the flag their parents flew. The terror of a mother watching her infant slip beneath ice floes carries no ideology. Suffering is suffering, and refusing to acknowledge it because the victims belong to the wrong nation is not justice, it is erasure. The Wilhelm Gustloff teaches us something about the nature of war itself. When nations go to war, they unleash forces that cannot be controlled. Alexander Marinesco saw a massive ship and fired torpedoes. He did not know it was packed with refugees. He did not know 5,000 children were aboard. He saw an enemy target and he destroyed it. That is what submarines do. That is what war demands. And the children died anyway. This is not about assigning blame. Marinesco was never charged with war crimes. The ship carried military personnel and anti-aircraft guns. Under the laws of war, it was a legitimate target. The Soviet submarine commander was doing his duty. The German captains were trying to save lives. The refugees were trying to survive. Everyone was following their own logic. And 9,000 people died. War creates these impossible situations. It puts civilians on military vessels and military personnel among civilians. It forces captains to choose between safety protocols and compassion. It puts a submarine commander in position to fire at what might be a troop transport or might be an ark of refugees, and makes that decision in seconds based on silhouettes and guesses. Admiral Karl Dönitz called Operation Hannibal a success. He was right. 97% of the people evacuated by sea reached safety. Over 1 million souls carried across the Baltic to western ports. The Wilhelm Gustloff was one of 161 ships lost. It was the worst single disaster, but it was one tragedy among many in an operation that saved far more lives than it lost. And yet, 9,343 people. Not statistics, people. Heinz Schön spent 60 years trying to give them names. He built an archive. He tracked down survivors. He recorded testimonies. He wrote books that were mostly ignored. He attended memorials that drew small crowds. He insisted that the dead deserved remembrance, even when remembrance was unfashionable. When Schön died in 2013, his ashes were placed in an urn and carried down to the wreck by divers who had to obtain special permission from Polish authorities. They laid his remains among the dead he had spent his life documenting. The chronicler joined the chronicle. The witness became part of the testimony. The Wilhelm Gustloff was supposed to be named Adolf Hitler. It was supposed to represent Nazi triumph. It was supposed to carry loyal German workers on subsidized cruises that proved the superiority of the National Socialist system. Instead, it carries the drowned bodies of people that same system failed to protect. There is a particular cruelty in that irony. The ship that symbolized strength through joy became a vessel of unimaginable horror. The regime that promised to make Germany great again could not save its own people from the consequences of its own war. The propaganda machine built the Gustloff to project power. The sea turned it into a grave. 80 years later, the lessons still apply. Regimes that promise glory often deliver catastrophe. Wars that seem righteous produce horrors that transcend any justification. Civilians pay the price for decisions made by leaders who never share their fate. The powerful send others to die. The vulnerable die first. And the stories that should be remembered get buried because remembering them is uncomfortable. The Wilhelm Gustloff is uncomfortable. It forces us to feel sympathy for people we have been taught to regard as enemies. It asks us to mourn German children while knowing what other German children were being taught in schools and youth camps. It complicates the clean narrative of good versus evil that makes World War II comprehensible. It asks us to hold two truths simultaneously: that Nazi Germany was monstrous and that its citizens were human beings capable of suffering. That is the hardest lesson. Not that war is hell. We know that. Not that civilians die. We know that too. The hardest lesson is that our enemies are people, that their children drown the same way ours do, that their screams sound the same in the darkness, that drawing a line between the victims we mourn and the victims we ignore is a choice we make, not a natural law. The Wilhelm Gustloff lies in darkness, slowly disintegrating, holding its dead. Polish charts mark the location as shipwreck. Divers are forbidden. The water is cold. The ghosts are silent. But now you know they are there. Now you know what happened on the night of January 30th, 1945, when a floating symbol of Nazi pride became the deadliest tomb the sea has ever known. 9,343 people, mothers, children, the elderly, the wounded, the guilty and the innocent, together. History forgot them. You don't have to.